Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Books I Should Have Read a Long Time Ago, at least in my opinion, desultorily chosen based on how I felt at the time. So one of the fundamentals of literary understanding, other than, all of those hundreds of thousands of books out there that comprise the lists of great literature that you should read before you die, written by names everybody recognizes, are folk tales and fairy tales and things of that nature, which comprise a good part of the basis of literature, because they're conversational gambits, they're outlines of stories, they're bases of stories that we all know and recognize and that get told and retooled because these are sort of the hundreds of stories that came up through telling and retelling by ordinary people. Stories that in some ways have wound up being finessed across centuries as, people told them and retold them and cleaned off rough edges, and in much the same way that folk music is, in a lot of ways, the result of centuries of anonymous authors basically finessing things, so too are folk tales. And given my background, it will not surprise anybody that I know a great deal more of Western folk tales and stories than I do of non-Western ones. But one of the ones that has very much had a central facet, a central underlying facet of Western literature for quite a while, is the Arabian Nights. That is, the Tales of 1001 Nights. And this cover, by the way, is not the book that I read. This annotated Arabian Nights, Tales from 1001 Nights, is not the whole story. It's not even really part of it. And it's not one that I read, it's just that the copy that I read was taken off of the Gutenberg Project, and the Gutenberg Project doesn't always have good covers. So I figured I'd get a cover that was more attractive than the geometric thing that you will see if you go wandering around on Gutenberg. Which I do recommend if you're looking for free books that are out of copyright that you can just, own, because it's good for that. Anyways, so the thing about the 1001 Arabian Nights is this is, in translation, 16 volumes. I doubt it's much shorter volumetrically in the original Arabic, because this is enough stories to fill 1001 nights. As I read this, as I have gotten to the end of volume 1, I've frankly only read 30-odd nights worth, but there have been a lot of stories. And the thing is that, for those who don't know, which of course maybe some of you, you will have doubtless heard the name Shahrazad, which is the tale spinner. You see, the story is roughly... Well, what you have in this is a story that is a framework upon which you rest the other stories. You see, the story in outline is that King Shahyar, with some other surrounding events, finds out that his wife and all of his concubines are cheating on him with blackamoor slaves, and decides that all women are horrific and faithless creatures, and what he's going to do, because he doesn't want to give up sex, because, why would you do that, is instead he is going to bring a woman to his rooms every night, and he will sleep with her and then execute her in the morning, because that way no woman can ever cheat on him. He wins. And so he does this for long enough that the women in his kingdom either flee the kingdom, or they go into seclusion, or they go into hiding of some other kind, and basically put him in a position where he can't find any women anymore, because none of them want to go anywhere near him. Completely understandably. And so his wazir, and I'm going to go off on a bit of a sideline here because the edition that I read was the Sir Richard Francis Burton edition, published in 1885, which is extremely scholarly. It is an English scholarly translation. It has an immense foreword in which he discusses how he came to decide to do this, some reminiscence about his time in Araby, in the Middle East, his rationale behind why he did it the way he did, his frequently sardonic comments about other people's efforts to make a translation of the Arabian Nights. And as I said, this is an effort at a complete translation, not as most of the time, indeed as in the one you're looking at, an annotated Arabian Nights, which says Tales from 1001 Nights, which does not indicate all of them. But anyways, his decision to do the whole thing and other people's, and as I said, frequently sardonic criticisms of other people's editions, following that, he discusses why he translates certain things that he does. There are large sections of poetry in this which he has made very clear that, in spite of the fact that he feels that if this were to be the best it could be, the poetry ought to be genuinely translated into proper verse with repeated rhyme at the end of each line, and so on and so forth. But that given the vagaries and differences between Arabic and English, it is incredibly more difficult to do that in English than in many other languages. Consider the ease with which one can repeatedly rhyme things in French as compared to English. French has unending repetitions of the same word endings, allowing one to rhyme a at the end of a word over and over again, whereas in English we have a great many fewer such things. We have a lot more words like orange, which doesn't rhyme with anything. Anyhow, so he discusses that, and he goes into some depth on that topic. He goes into some depth on the turpitudinous sections of the book. There is a lot of sex in this book. There's a lot of tales of and the man lay with that woman all night, and they, caressed and touched and so on and so forth until the daylight. There's a lot of that. And he says, you have to approach this in the way of, as he puts it, primitive cultures, that is, people who have not been brought to a point of being shamed by discussions of such private affairs, that you have to approach this with the openness of, this is a natural thing and we are not ashamed of its mere existence, and so we are saying they had sex, and this is what happened when they had sex. Now, it's not pornographic, this is not erotica, but it is eminently descriptive enough. Anyhow, so back to the overarching story. So you have the wazir, who we normally translate as vizier. As I said, he has a small disquisition on that topic alone in his voluminous footnotes, which are also frequently sardonic, very entertaining, very interesting. I wish these endnotes had been footnotes, because it would have been very nice to be able to have those references while reading, but, the limitations of Project Gutenberg are such that I simply can't do that. It doesn't jump between things at all well. Anyways, so getting back to this, so what you have in the course of this book is, you have the vizier and his daughter, Scheherazade, the name that people should actually recognize, herein translated as Shahrazad, because of various pronunciation issues, which again he goes into in some detail in his foreword and end notes. And she tells her father listen, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to become the king's sleeping mate for a night. And the vizier is like, why would you do that? Please, I don't want you to be executed. You are my daughter and I love you. Please don't do that. But she insists. And so she goes and she joins the king, she and her sister Dinazad, and she tells the king stories. Story after story after story, and every night she ends on a cliffhanger. Every night she stops because it is dawn and her allotted say is no longer allowed, and the king has to decide if it's worth executing her if he's not going to hear the end of the story. But these stories are so beautifully told, or so described in the books, and so fascinating that the king cannot but wait till the next night and ask to hear the end of the story. And so she does that, and then she'll tell another story and another and end on a cliffhanger. And thus she does for 1,001 nights, at the end of which the king decides that he will not execute her, that he will, I believe, I have not actually gone to the end of this, but I believe it's that he decides he will marry her properly and stop executing women just because, some women cheated on him that time. Anyhow, so that alone, it's an interesting frame for these stories upon stories. But the other interesting thing is that these stories tended to be very, very nested. That Scheherazade will be telling a story, and then within the story a character will say, "Hear me, O luckless king, as I tell you my tale," at which point the story takes a left turn as the character tells the king in the story his story. And indeed, frequently, these stories involve other characters who are telling stories. And so you have this nesting, you have an Inception-like layering of going further and further down. And then you crawl back up as you say, oh, right, we were in the middle of the story of that guy. And so, as you go through this, the nesting makes it very, very interesting, sort of conceptually, how all of this fits together. And the stories do run one from another. Over and over again, the story will basically just continue on as, the thing says, and so thus the tailor told the story of, cut to the next page, and there's a title. The Tailor's Tale, and then you will have the Tailor's story. And so it's very, very interesting. This story is chock full of this collection is chock full of tales of somebody who has to tell a tale to keep himself from being executed by some king or jinni or what have you. Jinn as in like a genie, except genies are not, as we think of them in the West, are not what the jinn are, although certainly jinn do contain genies. There's sort of you can be a jinn and not a genie from the Western perspective. They're kind of like, Celtic fae, really. It's a much better equivalent to think of the jinn as being like the fae in Celtic folk tales and mythology, these sometimes mischievous, sometimes cruel, magical characters who cast spells and enchant people and put bindings and blessings and all kinds of things on them, and when you violate those, you have all sorts of consequences, but can also occasionally give people good luck and grant wishes. It's a much closer equivalent. Anyways, and like I said, and so you go through, and I'm only at 30-odd nights. There's a reason why this is 16 volumes. As I said, it's 1,001 nights worth of stories. So there's a lot. And I actually have made the decision that I'm going to do that because it means that for a while at least I won't have to think of what book I should have read. So that's what we'll be doing on this particular sub-series for a while. And that's everything for this edition, and I will see you all next week.